What if I told you that between 2007 and 2010, the Federal Reserve secretly lent out more money than the entire GDP of the United States? Not $1 trillion, not $5 trillion, $28 trillion. And they hid it from you, from Congress, from everyone. You've been told the 2008 bailout cost $700 billion. That's the official story. The TARP program, the one they debated on TV, the one that made you angry. But that was theater. The real bailout? It happened in the shadows, through emergency lending facilities with names designed to bore you to death. Alphabet soup programs that sound like nothing. TAF, TELF, PDF, CEEP. Behind those acronyms, the Federal Reserve was pumping trillions, not billions, trillions into failing banks. American banks, European banks, banks you've never heard of. And here's the kicker, they didn't tell anyone until a 2011 audit forced them to. Think about that. While you were losing your job, your house, your savings in 2008, the people who caused the crisis were getting secret, unlimited money from the Fed. You felt that pain, didn't you? Maybe you're still feeling it. The debt, the inflation, the sense that the game is rigged. It is. So before we go deeper, drop a comment. Where are you watching from? And if you're tired of the official story, of the lies wrapped in economic jargon, hit subscribe, because what I'm about to show you, they never wanted you to know. Let's follow the money. Let's rewind to 1913. That's when the Federal Reserve was created, sold to the American public as a safeguard, a way to prevent bank panics, to stabilize the economy. But let's be honest about what it really was, a private banking cartel given the legal authority to print money. The Fed isn't a government agency, it's a network of private banks with a government-sounding name. And from day one, its job wasn't to protect you, it was to protect the banks. Fast forward to 1929. The stock market crashes, banks collapse, the Great Depression begins. And what does the Fed do? Nothing. Well, not nothing, they actually tighten the money supply, making everything worse. Millions lose their life savings. Unemployment hits 25%. Sound familiar? Now jump to 1971. President Nixon takes the dollar off the gold standard. Suddenly, money isn't backed by anything real. It's just paper, or increasingly, just numbers on a screen. The Fed can now print as much as it wants. No limits, no accountability. Sound familiar? By the 1980s and 92nd, something new emerges, the shadow banking system. These aren't your local Bank of America branches. These are investment banks, hedge funds, money market funds, institutions that act like banks but aren't regulated like banks. They're making loans, creating credit, betting trillions on complex derivatives. And the Fed is cheering them on. Because here's the thing, the bigger these institutions get, the more essential they become. Too big to fail, remember? By 2007, the shadow banking system is bigger than the traditional banking system. We are talking about $20 trillion in assets controlled by institutions with fancy names and zero safety nets. And they're all making the same bet, housing prices will never fall. Sound familiar? They package mortgages, good ones, bad ones, fraudulent ones, into securities. They slice them up, give them AAA ratings, and sell them around the world. Everyone's getting rich. Bankers are taking home million-dollar bonuses. The Fed is keeping interest rates low, pumping more fuel onto the fire. And you're being told to buy a house you can't afford. Because real estate always goes up, right? Until it doesn't. In 2007, the cracks begin to show. Subprime mortgages start defaulting. Housing prices fall. Suddenly, all those AAA-rated securities, they're worthless. Bear Stearns collapses in March 2008. The Fed orchestrates a bailout through JP Morgan Chase. Then, in September, the big one hits. Lehman Brothers fails. 150-year-old institution, gone overnight. $600 billion in assets, vanished. Panic, global panic. Banks stop lending to each other. The entire financial system freezes. Credit markets seize up. The economy is hours away from complete collapse. And that's when the Fed reveals its true power. Not through laws, not through votes, but through unlimited money creation. You saw the $700 billion TARP bailout on the news. The one Congress debated. The one that made you furious. But that was just the opening act. What came next? That's where the $28 trillion comes in. And that's where the real story begins. Because while you were watching Congress argue over $700 billion, the Federal Reserve was quietly, secretly, pumping out 40 times that amount through emergency lending programs most people have never heard of. Programs with boring names. Programs buried in financial reports. Programs they didn't disclose until they were legally forced to in 2011. Let's talk about Section 13.3 of the Federal Reserve Act. Sounds boring, right? That's the point. Section 13.3 gives the Federal Reserve emergency lending powers in unusual and exigent circumstances. Translation: when things go bad, the Fed can lend to anyone, not just American banks. Anyone. And they don't need permission. Not from Congress. Not from the President. Not from you. In 2008, the Fed invoked Section 13.3 and opened the money floodgates. They created lending facilities, special programs with acronyms designed to make your eyes glaze over. TAF, Term Auction Facility, lent directly to banks, no questions asked. TELF, Term Securities Lending Facility, let banks swap their worthless mortgage securities for cash. PDCF, Primary Dealer Credit Facility, direct loans to investment banks that weren't even supposed to have access to Fed money. CEP, Commercial Paper Funding Facility, bought up short-term corporate debt to keep the markets from imploding. And dozens more, each one pumping out billions, sometimes hundreds of billions at a time. And here's the part that should make your blood boil: they did it in secret. No press releases, no congressional hearings, just quiet transfers in the middle of the night. It wasn't until 2011, when Senator Bernie Sanders forced an audit through the Dodd-Frank Act, that we learned the truth. The Government Accountability Office released a report, and buried on page 131, there it was: the Federal Reserve had lent out $16.1 trillion through these programs. But wait, I said $28 trillion, didn't I? That's $16 trillion. That was just through the major facilities. When you add in the other programs, currency swaps with foreign central banks, asset purchases, guarantees, backstops, the total climbs to over $28 trillion. Let me say that again, $28 trillion. That's nearly twice the size of the entire U.S. economy at the time. And you know what the wildest part is? You won't believe the name of the biggest recipient. It wasn't an American bank. Let's break down exactly what happened, because this is where it gets really dark. The Federal Reserve didn't just bail out American banks. They bailed out the entire global financial system through something called central bank liquidity swaps. Here's how it works in plain English. A European bank, let's say Deutsche Bank, has dollar-denominated loans on its books. Loans to American companies, mortgages backed by U.S. assets, derivatives tied to U.S. markets. When the crisis hits, Deutsche Bank needs dollars, lots of them, to pay back loans, to cover losses, to stay alive. But they can't get dollars. The American banks won't lend to them. The market's frozen. So what does the Fed do? They lend dollars to the European Central Bank. The ECB then lends those dollars to Deutsche Bank. On paper, it looks like the ECB is doing the lending. But the money, that's coming straight from the Federal Reserve. From you, from American taxpayers. And Deutsche Bank wasn't alone. Barclays in the UK, $868 billion. Royal Bank of Scotland, $541 billion. BNP Paribas in France, $175 billion. UBS in Switzerland, $287 billion. These are the numbers from the 2011 GAO audit. Real numbers, not theories, not estimates. The Federal Reserve secretly lent hundreds of billions of dollars to foreign banks while Americans were losing their homes. But it gets worse. Let's talk about the asset purchases, the quantitative easing they sold you as economic stimulus. Starting in 2008, the Fed began buying mortgage-backed securities, the same toxic assets that caused the crisis in the first place. They bought them from banks at inflated prices, paying more than they were worth on the open market. By 2014, the Fed had purchased $1.7 trillion in mortgage-backed securities. Think about that. The banks created fraudulent securities, sold them as safe investments, crashed the economy, and then the Fed rewarded them by buying up their garbage at a profit. That's not a bailout. That's a transfer of wealth from you to them, and it's still happening. Between 2008 and 2020, the Fed's balance sheet exploded from $900 billion to over $7 trillion. Then COVID hit, and they did it again. In March 2020, when the markets panicked, the Fed announced unlimited quantitative easing. Not $500 billion, not $1 trillion. Unlimited. Within weeks, they pumped out another $3 trillion. By 2022, the Fed's balance sheet peaked at $9 trillion. $9 trillion. Money created out of thin air. And where did it go? Into asset prices, stocks, bonds, real estate. If you owned assets, you got richer. If you didn't, your rent went up. Your groceries got more expensive. Your dollar bought less. This is the hidden tax of inflation, the secret mechanism by which the Fed transfers wealth from the poor and middle class to the rich, and they call it stimulus. Let me give you a specific example of how insane this system is. In 2008, Morgan Stanley received $107 billion in Fed loans through the emergency facilities. $107 billion. That's more than the GDP of most countries. And what did Morgan Stanley do with that money? Did they lend it to small businesses? Help struggling homeowners? No, they stabilized their balance sheet, paid their executives, bought back their own stock. And here's the kicker, Morgan Stanley is a private company. The Fed isn't supposed to lend to them at all under normal circumstances. But these weren't normal circumstances. And the Fed doesn't play by the rules when its friends are in trouble. Or take Citigroup. Citigroup received $2.5 trillion, yes, trillion with a T, in total support from the Fed through various programs. Not in loans that were paid back. In total exposure, loans, guarantees, asset purchases, backstops. Citigroup was bankrupt, technically insolvent. They should have failed, but the Fed decided they were systemically important, too big to fail, so they kept them alive. With your money. And what's Citigroup doing today? Posting record profits, paying out massive bonuses, while you're still dealing with the consequences of their recklessness. Now let's talk about the moral hazard this creates. Moral hazard is a term economists use when someone takes risks because they know they won't face the consequences. If you know the Fed will bail you out, why not take massive risks? Lever up 30 to 1. Bet on derivatives. Make fraudulent loans. If you win, you keep the profits. If you lose, the Fed and the taxpayers cover your losses. That's the system we have now. It's not capitalism. It's socialism for the rich and capitalism for the poor. And it's getting worse. Because every time there's a crisis, the Fed's response is the same. Print more money. 2008, print trillions. 2020, print trillions. 2023, when regional banks started failing, print hundreds of billions through the Bank Term Funding Program. The pattern is clear. The Fed has become the backstop for all financial risk. And who pays for it? You do. Through inflation. Through devalued wages. Through a dollar that buys less every year. Since 2008, the money supply has increased by over 400%. But your wages? They've barely kept up with official inflation numbers that are manipulated to look better than reality. Real inflation, the cost of housing, healthcare, education, food has exploded. A house that cost $200,000 in 2008 now costs $400,000 or more. College tuition has doubled. Healthcare costs through the roof. But the Fed tells you inflation is under control at 2-3. It's a lie. And the $28 trillion. That's just what we know about. There are programs we still don't have full details on. Off-balance sheet transactions. Foreign currency swaps that are never fully disclosed. The true number could be higher, much higher. And here's the final piece that should terrify you. This system is now permanent. The Fed's balance sheet never went back to pre-2008 levels. It's permanently elevated. The emergency programs? They've been codified, made easier to activate. The next crisis, and there will be a next crisis, the Fed will do this again. Except next time, it'll be bigger, faster, more brazen. Because they've learned they can get away with it. They can print trillions, bail out their friends, hide the details. And you'll just keep paying for it. So where does this leave us? Here's the uncomfortable truth. The 2008 crisis never ended. It was papered over, hidden under $28 trillion in secret loans and money printing. The same banks that caused the crisis. They're bigger now, more powerful, more too big to fail. The Fed's balance sheet, still bloated, still full of toxic assets. The system, still built on debt, leverage, and the promise that the Fed will always step in. But there's a limit. There has to be. You can't print infinite money without consequences. Eventually, the dollar's value collapses. Trust in the system evaporates. And when that happens, not if, when there won't be a bailout big enough to fix it. Because who bails out the Fed? This is the end game of a system built on borrowed time and borrowed money. The people who run it know it. That's why they're buying gold, Bitcoin, hard assets. They're preparing for what comes next. Are you? Look, I'm not telling you to panic. I'm telling you to pay attention. Question the narrative. Follow the money. Understand that the game is rigged, and it's rigged against you. The $28 trillion wasn't a one-time emergency. It was a template, and they'll use it again. So here's my question for you. Are we wiser now, or are we just walking the same path in better suits? Drop a comment. Tell me what you think. Tell me if you're seeing through the illusion. And if this opened your eyes, if you're done with the official story, hit that subscribe button. Because they don't want you to know this. They want you confused, distracted, believing the lie. But you know better now. Follow the money. Always.